Phenomenal. Well, excellent. Well, we are live and streaming, so want to welcome everybody into the latest session. It's part of our 12 days of TMC. This session here is called Real Stories from Lenders Who Have Had Cyber Attacks and How to Prevent Them. I've got three great discussion leaders joining me today. So briefly introduce them and we'll get started. So first off, we've got Robert Moore, President of Inventive Technologies. Robert, how you doing?
Good. Hi, Tom. Thanks for having us.
Always great to have you. From our lender perspective, we've got Executive Vice President, Division Head with WesBanco Bancorp, Ed Hensley. Ed, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. And then given a bit of a legal perspective here as well, we have our longtime partner, James Brody, who's the Mortgage Banking Practice Chair with Johnston Thomas Attorneys at Law. How we doing, James?
Good, good. Great to be here.
Great to have all three of you. Well, I think we'll jump right in here. Really to kick off the topic, love to, Robert, kind of turn it over to you just to briefly describe, for our attendees, technically what constitutes a cyber attack. And then we'll kind of start to jump into some real firsthand experiences.
All right, sounds good. So I'll start with the definition of a cyber incident. So that's basically any unauthorized, accidental, unlawful access, use, exfiltration, theft, disablement, sharing, destruction, alteration or modification of IT assets or company data, by an unlawful third party, or even someone inside the organization. So that's kind of the legal aspect of it. So it covers quite a bit. Let me give you just a few examples of what a cyber incident is. It could be something that we all know in this industry, such as wire fraud. We're all, of course, extremely aware of the ransomware, malware, phishing attacks, social engineering. Then it could be the loss of non-public information through things as simple as an employee that leaves their computer on over the weekend and the cleaning people are able to access that. It's not password protected, or they leave their password posted and they're able to log in. Could be the loss of a loan officer's or some other employee's laptop via theft or just accidental loss. You don't happen to have the hard drive encrypted or the laptop locked. And of course, there's ways to break that. So there's a variety of ways besides, of course, the brazen attacks, getting in through the system, basically camping out for months on end, studying, all that sort of thing. So these are, there's lots of ways that a cyber incident can occur.
Oh, Robert, I appreciate that perspective because there is a wealth of different ways that such attacks can occur. It's a good precursor here. Real quick, I want to remind our attendees, we got a lot to cover, so we may run short on time, but any questions that you have for our discussion leaders, please feel free to drop them into the Zoom or the Whova chat. And if we've got time, we'll try to address them. And if not, try to bounce this off of our discussion leaders after the fact to get you some responses in hindsight. So being the session called Real Stories from a lender perspective, Ed, I want to kind of get your past experience in having dealt with a breach or cyber attack, especially since you come from a unique perspective being a depository where you're not just worrying about the lending side, but also, a lot of consumer banking and different types of associated products or access points for a breach.
Yeah, good points, Tom. And to just kind of give some examples. I think if you're a financial institution, you have to operate on the premise that you're always under attack. There's always somebody trying to get within your system. One example I will give is we uncovered a organization that had tried to duplicate our login webpage. And if you mistyped one letter, you wound up at their site. They did a very good job of camouflaging it. That's not uncommon. So obviously we caught it. We've had another recent attempt where they tried to infiltrate our systems by guessing people's passwords. And they were going through people within the organization that had a social presence, i.e. loan officers and wealth management people. So to Robert's point of keeping secure data, keeping your passwords, not having your computer left on. All those are the things to do. But you also have to have programs in place with your IT of what they're looking for on that backside and how they're fighting off the attacks. One of the coordinated attacks we had with the password attempt, we were getting hit from 4 continents. So it was a very sophisticated, coordinated effort. Yeah, we're a depository, but if you're an IMB and you've got a servicing portfolio, getting to that customer information could be just as valuable to them. A couple other examples that I could say as I've been involved over the years with the local MBA and the state MBAs. I know one of the local MBAs in Ohio had their online account hacked. So when people were paying their dues, the money did not go to the association. It went someplace else. So having the right security on your websites is a key. And Robert made the point here, one of his points was wire fraud. That is a very sophisticated, ongoing, it's been happening. I know we had a customer last year that happened to be a commercial client. They hacked into his email. He lost about $40,000. I heard one last week from another institution and a customer where there was $1 million wire fraud. So having safeguards on your wiring instructions and what you're doing becomes a critical part. Know who you're dealing with. And I think my words of wisdom was automatically assume you're under attack at all times and be diligent. Preach that to your people. Change your passwords frequently. That's what we require. Lots of emails get compromised. People are trying to guess. I mean, I got a notification the other day that somebody had tried to compromise my email. The last attempt, not successful, but phishing attempts are out there. They're real. And as I said, be diligent, have the right systems in place, work with your IT folks, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, appreciate that, Ed. And I mean, you made the point, we had a prep discussion, you hear how frequently some of these cyber attacks are taking place just through a lot of industry publications. That's just, the attacks that were successful. You don't hear one lick about all the attempts taking place behind the scenes, which I think, really brought full circle just how frequent and how sophisticated in scale these, different types of attacks are.
Yeah, it happens every week, Tom, to your point. It happens ongoing. A lot of you may not even be aware unless it's brought up in your executive management meetings or your IT keeps that kind of close circle. But it happens, and you just, again, I'm going to say always assume it's happening and have a plan of what you're going to do. The last time we had that attempting to get our passwords from some of our folks, we immediately shut down all their external websites until we had some safeguards in place.
Excellent. Yeah, you can never have enough safeguards in place, unfortunately. James, I want to bring you into the discussion here, working with a lot of clients in the mortgage banking industry. I know we talked previously, kind of reflected on, I think hacks and phishing attacks in particular. So we'd love for you to share, past client experience that you dealt with on mortgage banking attack.
Look, I mean, part of the problem, we represent a lot of mid-size IMBs and brokers as well, all across the board. But what we see is a lot of the smaller companies who believe that they are not, the targets of these types of attacks, and that's just simply wrong. These attacks are coming, I mean, I don't know how many people are out there doing this, but myself, my office, we ourselves get these attacks, on a daily basis. One of my colleagues, I get an email from him, or it looks like from him, every other day, asked me to come by his office, got something to talk about. And if you hover your mouse over it, you'll see a whole string that will identify that it is not, someone in your office or someone you know. So part of the problem here, part of the issue with what we have seen and handling, we have handled a number of these over the last year alone, is making sure that everyone understands that they have to have training, especially right now with COVID, the remote work environment, unsecured data. You have the remote printing. You have to have strong policies and procedures in place. The training where you're sending these types of phishing attacks so that you can see who clicks on it, why they click on it, and they can learn from that. But it's all done internally. Having a proper incident response team, having the HR, IT, legal, and making sure that you have a good cyber policy in place. I mean, at the end of the day, the fees in an attack are massive. I mean, right off the bat, you have to cut your systems off. You have to have people go in and basically look at where the breach is, what information was compromised, and then you have to make a determination whether or not you want to pay these people, because it may cost you a lot more money in downtime if you don't do that. So you have to have a strong, again, plan. You have to have the training, and then you have to have a good response. And with regard to the cyber policies, while it was one of these kind of policies, a few years ago that maybe I'll hold off, it's not that big of a deal. They're getting more and more expensive now, obviously, with all these attacks. By applying for a cyber policy in and of itself, you go through a training because they're asking you all the questions about whether you have everything that you need. So, there's been a lot of surprise from our clients that they've been victimized here. They didn't think that they were the targets. And, that was unfortunately wrong. And, the whole process, I mean, you have reputational issues. You have notice to the attorney generals in the states. Now, I think it might be Massachusetts has added biometric data to sensitive personal information, so that if that's out, that's considered a data breach. So, it's an evolving area. There's no federal notification aside, you have GLBA, of course, but every state has their own notification requirements. Some states, you only have to have one consumer whose data was compromised. Some require 200, 300, 500, before you have to notify the attorney generals. So again, understanding that this is a real risk, making sure that you have proper training procedures, that would help, and it would have helped our clients more had they done it before that time and saved them some more money, especially on the policies, because again, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in some of these cases, and your typical policies just aren't going to cover that much.
I mean, you laid out a ton of great points there, James. Just, and it's got me thinking, like, depending on the size or scale of your organization as an independent mortgage banker versus a depository, the impact of having to shut down your business affects multiple lines of business, and that just adds up on the expense of getting back up to speed. To your point, some of the reputational risks, and even in some of your earlier points brought me back to a point Robert had made in our prep discussion too, just that it's not key stakeholders in your organization that are only going to be the potential entry points for these type of attacks. Like Robert surmised it perfectly, is that you're only as strong as your weakest link within the organization. So a lot to consider in hindsight, to your point, when these policies may not have been top of the heap for a priority for a lender. Once you're victimized, you see that liability and you firsthand know exactly what you're dealing with an exposure standpoint.
Well, it's been a hot issue across the board. I mean, especially it's been in the news. There's been, again, over the last year, I've handled more attacks than I had, I guess, in the last 5 years. So, it's coming rapidly, and there's a lot of different moving pieces. But again, if you have a strong plan in place, if and when that does happen, you are infinitely better positioned to understand what you need to do, who you need to speak with, and how you need to react.
Absolutely right. And Robert, let me turn it over to you, just kind of for client example you had in mind, and it brought me from our prep discussion too, and you kind of illuminated to us just the potential depth of the impact. And I'd love you to elaborate a little bit on the client experience and some of the fallout throughout the organization, maybe different areas that we don't typically think about on the surface that can be impacted by a breach.
Right. I think until you kind of experience it firsthand, or you experience third hand through someone that you're close to, you don't realize the depth and breadth of the consequences and the fallout of the cyber incident. So I've got a couple of incidents I'd like to share that I think will make it very real. One is a new client we picked up after the incident, and the other one is not a client. So I want to make sure that we know that, because I wouldn't want them identified by someone going through our list. But it is an independent mortgage banker, very similar to many of you, but they were hit by ransomware. And so I know some of them personally, and so I had kind of front row access to what was happening. But it's not just the cost of the ransom, which they ended up having to pay or making the decision to pay, but just the cost up and down your mortgage operations. Like James said, you're closing down business basically until you can figure out where the problem is and begin remediating that. So in the meantime, you're not closing loans. You got people still originating loans or trying to, theoretically. You have no way of selling those loans. You have no way of shipping those loans. So what do? I mean, it just has a ripple and an exponential effect throughout the mortgage operations, and especially financially. So, and the other incident illustrates, James' point too, is it doesn't matter what size you are. So the new client we inherited, not in the mortgage business, but they're in the property development, and they work with private investors, and that's how they raise their capital in order to do their new projects, developments, etc. So someone compromised a password and got into the system, and then they were in there. We did a lot of the remediation. Best we could tell, they ran for at least 6 months. So they learned who the players were. They learned who their private investors were, and then they got inside the investor relations manager's email account, wrote rules that redirected specific email to certain investors, and then rerouted their email responses back and sent it offshore outside the country to the bad actors. And this is a company, they do multi-million dollars of work, but they're about 35 employees. The investor, at the end of the day, the end results, the investor lost $500,000 that they wired to the account offshore to the bad actors, all the time thinking they were dealing with the investor relations manager that they had dealt with for the last 2 or 3 years. That's how good they were. So they had a significant monetary loss for them, but even worse was the reputational loss and the lack of trust that that investor and other investors had. So again, a rippled and exponential impact far beyond just the monetary loss. Those are a couple of real world examples that I've come across in the last few months. And I would emphasize all of the points the other guys have made about the steps you need to take. And then also understand you are a target. Everything is automated nowadays. You can download ransomware software off of the dark web. Anybody can do it. And then you're in business and it's automated. That's why smaller companies, medium-sized IMBs, you're all targets now because it's automated, and our defenses typically are less than the big depository institutions, the larger corporations. We don't have the budget or the resources to throw at cyber defense.
It is great points, Robert. I appreciate you kind of laying that out there. I want to bring it back to Ed for a moment here, because you laid out a lot in your earlier scenario and advice here too. But when we had a prep discussion, you also kind of laid out targeted attacks taking place, not just through phishing on systems or email, but even through individuals in the organization on their social media accounts. And coming from all over the world. And real briefly, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love you to kind of expand upon what you saw from that in the past.
What we saw was a coordinated attempt, as I saw, coming from 4 continents, all offshore, to Robert's point. And once they would go to the social media, they would try to come into the company website, and they would start trying to guess those passwords to get into the system. But with some of the protocols and things that we had place, we caught it very quickly before they could get in there. What we've seen, from that wire fraud, what we've heard from some of our competitors and friends in the business of that whole email thing of engaging and compromising the email. We have a joint venture with a title company, and the owner of that company does a lot of presentations on this fraud. And it's amazing. A lot of your customers, the realtors and some of the builders, they all use Gmail. Some still use AOL, Yahoo, whatever. These people are out there fishing for that all the time on the customer side. They're getting more sophisticated, to James's approach of how do they get in your system and how do they come in there for the ransomware. So it's, your IT people really need to be cutting edge. They've got to stay on top of it. And as I said, you always have to go into the assumption that someone's trying to break in. And that's kind of where we operate on a daily, weekly basis, and how many attempts that we fight off. But unfortunately, like I said, we've heard of some wire fraud that people don't pay attention. We've instituted some things on the back end with wire fraud detection. We have a vendor that we work with on that. That's been very, very successful for us. I think a lot of our competitors have done the same thing, because I've heard these stories, $250,000 here, $500,000 there, but they will try to get in your system, and they're getting very creative, going to social media, trying to come in and guess your passwords just because of your email address. How many people, your email address work out there, it's out there, it's on your social media, whatever that is. And then they're going to go there and they're going to start trying to guess passwords and run these programs that try to guess that. So having that strong password protection, changing it frequently, all the things that everybody else is going to tell you, it's a must to do.
Yeah, those great points. And I think we had a similar session at our recent summer conference in Terranea, and I believe the stat in there was 92% of all cyber attacks are born out of email. Robert's like, and I'm pretty sure that was your stat, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's correct. It's way up there. So,
and so we've kind of talked about, real world scenarios of cyber attacks, some of the high level things that lenders can do to be proactive in preventing them. For our attendees, there's a great resource in the Whova stream that Robert graciously provided, kind of tips to, I think, like a 6-prong incident response program. I'd love to, Robert, kind of start with you, and we'll go to James and around to Ed, because you guys have talked about it a bit. Just in going through the scenarios, but would love your advice out there to our attendees too, just on some quick tips, to avoid being victimized beyond kind of what we've laid out, and even to be able to take it a step further and what you do once you have been breached.
well, there's several things you have to do, and Ed and James have touched on most of those, but let me just kind of summarize what I think are about 4 of the most important things that you can do. First of all, you've got to have technical defenses in place, which Ed highlighted, but whether it's your internal IT staff or you outsource that, you need to have cutting edge technical defenses in place. That's everything from a secure VPN, robust and secure firewalls. You need to have multi-factor authentication in place. You need to have endpoint protection, which is especially important in the remote environment that we're in, so that you have protection at all of the different desktops, laptops of your remote workers, malware, antivirus, ransomware, spam filtering, all of that, so you can prevent as much of those phishing attacks from even coming in. You need to have encryption of your data, whether it's on a laptop, desktop, your servers, whether it's on your backups, whether it's on your cloud backups. And then, it's so basic, you almost don't mention it half the time, but you need to start with your backups. Make sure that you have solid backups, good backups, frequent backups, and that they're stored in multiple sources offsite and in the cloud. I know of one ransomware victim where they had good backups, but they didn't have enough offsite replication, so they were in a pinch because of the ransomware attack. So hugely important. I've got to emphasize that you begin all of this with the policies in place. So you need to have strong cybersecurity policies. That's where it begins and ends. And then you need to create a culture of cybersecurity awareness. And that begins at the top. That's important. If it's important to the CEO, ultimately it's important to the employees. And then you got to have security awareness training. You got to train your employees to hover over the email address to make sure that it's valid, make sure that they're looking at it, as Ed mentioned, so that the domain name isn't just one letter off. I had a client last week where a different depository institution, their software that they used on the back end caught the attempted wire fraud, but the domain name looked perfect. The email looked perfect. It was simply one letter off in the entire company domain name. So your employees, especially your funders and closers, need to be on the lookout for that type of stuff. So I can't emphasize security awareness and training enough. And then last thing is cybersecurity is a journey. It's not a destination. You're going to be, if you haven't started it, start it now. You guys heard me say this at Tyrannia. And you will never stop doing it. You need to continue addressing it, putting resources to it, both financial and people, and then know that you're doing the best that you can from that. A great way to get started is to, if you haven't done it, do some baseline assessments, IT cybersecurity assessments. You need to find out where you are, find out where your gaps are, and then what you need to address it.
Perfect. And James, from your perspective, what should a lender be doing in conjunction with their legal counsel to, help prepare themselves, either in advance or once they've been breached?
So starting off, I mean, and I agree with everything, that Robert and Ed had said, but you need to look at the policies and procedures. I mean, that's where, as Robert said, it's going to start. By going through those policies and procedures and checklists. I think we had provided some at the conference in Tyranny, and we have some checklists available, if needed. But you're going through those policies and procedures, going through your training, you're going to be talking with your legal counsel about that. You're going to be talking with your HR, you're going to be talking with your IT, and you need to kind of have a summit. I mean, I would take some time, meet with the heads of IT, HR, legal, marketing, and really focusing on this. And there are a lot of policies and procedures that are very well crafted, but as with everything, it's like MSAs. You can make a compliant MSA, but if no one's going to follow it, it's going to be non-compliant. So it's the same here. If you have a strong policy and procedure on data protection, but no one's adhering to it, it's not going to do the job. So you need to make it in layman's terms as much as possible, and understand that this is kind of a convoluted subject to a lot of people like me who aren't information technology specialists. So my focus is on kind of the parameters. IT and them, they can really focus in, get those data protection software. Two-factor authentication tends to be something that is very helpful. As was mentioned with regard to those the real world guessing the passwords. You have to understand that a lot of people's data gets stripped in these other attacks on social media and others, and they may have all these passwords. So, understanding that they can use those to kind of have these peripheral attacks. That's really what it comes down to. And of course, again, the insurance coverage is just one of those things that, from my perspective, after seeing the bills, my bills, the bills of the IT specialists who have to come in, it's one of those things that's very well worthwhile to at least look into, because once you have an attack, it's possible that you won't be able to get coverage for another one. So there's a lot of things, and then if you have a policy, you need to make sure that you talk with your legal counsel about filing a claim, because if you try to make a payment, that could go ahead and cause a denial under coverage. You need to check with OFAC. If you pay someone that's on their list, that's strict liability. You could get, fines for trying to get your company off the ground and running again. So there's just so many different things. It's good to, again, policies and procedures, focus in on that, get the key personnel, have that meeting so that the focus is only on this issue without talking about every peripheral matter that comes up day to day. Get it in place, and then get, a training regimen to your staff, something that, is really workable, and easy things like these phishing, these mock phishing emails that go out. We've caught a lot of, little errors here and there. People click on it. But I can tell you, after they get hit or dinged on one of them, they're very careful about doing that in the future. And I would rather have it done then, when someone's, private sensitive information is not going to be compromised, because, as you know, the regulators, they care most about consumer protection. And that's the old way they're always looking.
Is the name of the game. Ed, real quick, I know we're running up on time here, but James and Robert both unpacked a lot there. Was there, I guess, anything further from your firsthand perspective, kind of after the fact, what maybe you had to do internally to adjust after, potential breach?
I agree on the comment. It's a destination, a journey, not a destination. Policy, procedures, but you have to stress the awareness factor to everyone in the organization. The test fish emails, yeah, you're going to be shocked at who you catch sometimes. You're right, they don't do it again. But it is total awareness. It's just not your computer at your desk. We're a mobile society. You got phones now that are compromised. You got your mobile devices, your iPad, your laptop. It's all the above. So it encompasses a lot, and it's constant education to your staff and looking for that new trend that's going to happen.
Spot on. Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate the time today. I know I had a couple questions, so I will filter those out after the discussion, and look to leverage your collective knowledge and experience to provide some insights back to our attendees here. But quick reminder for programming note, we're kicking off day 3 of the 12 days TMC tomorrow, 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 Pacific, with our first round of lightning showcases. So be sure to join us for that. We got home binder and mortgage coach, TriServe appraisal management, as well as First American DocuTech. So a lot more in store as we continue the 12 days. But Ed, James, Robert, I want to each thank you again for your insights and for imparting your knowledge on our collaborative network here. Really appreciate the 3 of you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.
Take care.